All right, we're back on the Jeep Cherokee. As you can see, the motor is gone. We yanked that out. If you saw my other video, you know why. We have a pretty major crack right there in the sleeve, goes down there, and it looks like a couple more. If you can just start to see them, looks like they're forming. So we got a junkyard engine to put back in the Cherokee. Let me show it to you. So here is our engine as it came on the wooden pallet from the salvage yard. They did leave the intake on. You can see they took the exhaust manifold off. All the coil packs are in. Some of the coolant hoses. So there it is. Let's get this thing prepped to go in the car. All right, with most engines these days, they put them in a lot of different vehicles. This engine, although we're putting it into the Jeep Cherokee, it actually came out of a Renegade. So there's a few things that we got to strip off from this that aren't applicable for our motor, or they're in the wrong location. So we're going to strip some of that stuff down, pull the wiring harness back, and then to just freshen the motor up while it's out, it's easy to do. We're going to go ahead and do the water pump, and we're going to do the timing chain. That way this motor is fresh, and hopefully she can drive it for a long time with trouble-free. All right, we're getting some of this wiring stripped off. We're going to use the harness off our vehicle. But one thing I wanted to point out is sometimes you can pry those little these little guys off, but actually if you just spin them and with a little bit of pressure underneath, I didn't break one of them off. All of them came right out, no problem. So if you take a little bit of time, you can save some of these little parts. One great thing about getting a junkyard motor with all the wiring harnesses on it is because any of these little clips or these little safety pieces that you broke maybe on your engine, this gives you a second chance to maybe salvage some of them. So try to be careful, learn how they come apart. That way you don't bust them all up. The engine out as you're pulling stuff apart though, good idea to really double check where stuff is routed. That way you land it back where it was. All right, here is all the stuff we stripped off this motor to get it ready. So there it is, kind of just down to, I think, everything that's gonna stay on. Choosing where you're going to pick it up from is really important because you don't want anything like gouging any of the seal surfaces. You don't want something riding up against any of these little plugs. You break something off here, now you're tearing into something further. So just take the time to make sure where you got it hooked up is okay for lifting. For right now, I'm just going to the bench. Okay, anytime you're messing around with a junkyard motor, you might find that there's a little damage. So this one has a little bit of damage. We actually got a reduced rate on this because of this. And then on this front cover, there was a little bit of damage as well. But both of those items were in really good shape on our original engine. Shoot. Still full of oil. All right, here is the inside of our oil pan, and just looks like waste oil. I don't see any heavy sludge buildup or any like metal shavings that would be shining, making it look all sparkly. And here's the bottom of our engine, so we'll clean that off a little bit better, see what it looks like. All right, so there are the spark plugs. You can see actually they all look pretty good. They're old, but they're all kind of burning evenly. Nothing looked too bad on that. Same with the valves, a little dark in there, but I'll show you that later. All right, with the motor sitting back up now, it can drain. I'm just gonna let it sit there. 21 mil, I think this was. So I've got to pop that free. I already have the valve cover off, and then we're gonna pull the timing chain cover off so that we can go ahead and do the timing chain while it's off. And of course, we're gonna put a new water pump in as well, just so that everything that's hard to reach is taken care of before we seal it up. Okay, I got the nut out. I've turned the timing mark to the timing mark that is on the case. And you can see here, here's our little timing mark on our chain, which is actually off by a tooth. So I'm gonna go ahead and actually pull this off and see if the other timing mark is approximately where it needs to be. Maybe somebody just did the chain and it's off just a little bit. Not gonna freak out about that. Okay, so earlier I said I wasn't gonna freak out about it, and that's because sometimes even though your timing mark is rolled to where it needs to be, you have to go around a couple of more times. So when I did it a few more times, orange landed right on that timing mark. This is supposed to be up, so that's correct. This one is supposed to be horizontal with the bottom of the block, so it is correct. And hopefully you can see right there, that timing chain is on that. So we're in good shape here. There's no problems there. So now we'll take off the guides, take all this off, put the new timing chain on, and we can button this back up. That. We've got our top mark right there. We've got our bottom one right on there. And so we'll start with our bottom. Kind of get it lined up. And there we go. It's a little on the loose side, but that'll be taken out when we put our tensioners in. So just make sure it doesn't skip a tooth while it's sitting there. Don't remove that until you're ready to put the pressure on. Once you pull it, it's going to shoot out, and that's going to be it. Okay, there it is. We're still on all our marks. Put that back in so we don't accidentally lose it. I'll get everything on and tighten it all back up, but let's take a look at that. All right, there it is. So we got the tops of 1, 2, 3, 4, but the one is kind of partially still under, but we're gonna say it's pretty close. So the timing chain set that was on this was not in too bad a shape. But the cover on this one, they say just do a crisscross pattern. So I'm just gonna kind of work it from the center. All right, just thought I'd show you real quick our silicone. So it just kind of bulges out. If you get the right amount, it just kind of, should have a nice little bead all the way around. So I went ahead and put our tensioner back on, our idler pulley back on. Now we're gonna jump over and put the gasket and put the new water pump in. So we've got the gasket on. I just put a little bit of RTV on that gasket just to kind of hold it in place. Then we'll stick our water pump on, torque it down. Okay, I'm leaving the intake manifold off until I install the engine in the car. So I went ahead and took this opportunity though to clean that with a Scotch-Brite and then just blow everything down on this side. So with the head all clean, I went ahead and went to where all the corners were, where the gasket kind of makes a little bend, and went ahead and put in some RTV, and then also where these two surfaces mate. There's a pocket in the gasket. Let me show you. So you can see there's a little pocket for sealant. Those are right where those two come together, and then anywhere where it makes a corner and a change. So going ahead and put that in, put all of our new seals in. Okay, we are back on. Now we're gonna go around and do the bolt pattern, 44 inch-pounds, and then I think it's 90. Okay, so we have the surface all cleaned up for our oil pan. And so we'll get the oil pan ready and put our RTV all the way around, a nice bead of it, put it on all at once. Okay, we got the oil pan back on, and you can see we got just a nice little bead of silicone all the way around, or RTV. Put our bracket back on. I'll throw the torque specs here for these. And while this was laying nice and flat, went ahead and cleaned up the surface for the exhaust manifold. I think this one was off for a while. This has got the catalytic converter hooked to it, so I'm sure the junkyard probably scrapped that right away, because those are pretty valuable. So that was a little bit bad, so got that cleaned up good. I went ahead and stuck the plugs back in and the coil packs just loosely, just so nothing would fall into them, and then getting some of these little other small things, thermostat housing put in. And next we're going to double check that our ring gear on this motor is okay on the flex plate. All right, on the other motor, the oil filter and cooler setup was bolted on. So this one, if you spin this nut out, it's an Allen 12 mil. You can take the whole cooler assembly off. These are just a little bit out of round from working on it, and so that one's permanently mounted. So we're just going to get rid of this one. Obviously we got to use that one, and since this oil cooler is still on, everything is in good shape, I'm just going to use this one and put it right back on the motor. So we'll just take these and put them in our surplus parts, because we're not going to use it. All right, so this thing is put back together and hopefully ready to go in the car. So I covered the ports so we don't get anything in that. Of course, like I said, new water pump. We got everything done in the timing. Covered this side. Only put back on what I need to. I wanted to keep the motor pretty slim, and I'm going to show you why. If you saw the first video on this Jeep Cherokee, you know that I was pulling the head because we had found that there was a blown head gasket. And in fact, it was, but it was a little bit more serious than that. It was a cracked sleeve, and the crack goes all the way through into the water jacket, which meant that we would have had to have some machine work done. Too costly to do when you consider getting a junkyard engine. So I already had the engine completely stripped down to this point, so it was actually really easy just to pull it out of the top. That got me thinking, why can't we put it back in the same way? That's the reason I'm making this video, because it's a little bit different than the procedure you'll see in the book. So the book says drop the whole subframe out, pull the engine out from the bottom, put it back together, and then put it back up as a unit. So we're gonna do it a little bit differently. All right, so one issue, this bolt wants to hit the subframe. So we're gonna pull it out. I'm gonna leave the pulley on. Hopefully it'll just kind of stay put, but I'm gonna zing the bolt out because I know that I can put the bolt back in from underneath. The next little difficult thing is getting it around the AC compressor. So once you get it in just a little ways, you're going to want to push that back, pull the compressor up so then that the motor can slip down in kind of behind it. I might even actually install it at that point if there's enough slack in the hose. Okay, the motor is down in and pretty much sitting on the nub of the torque converter. So a couple things to do now. Put your starter, get it down there, get your lead put back on it, tighten that up, and just leave it lay there loose. And the next thing I'm gonna do is, before I set that in, is put the intake manifold back in. Okay, probably during your project, you busted a few of these clips. And so what you can do is take the busted piece off, take your cutter, and cut it, and then put it in the other way. So normally it would have had the little rib up, which would have been your lock, but now you're going to be using the lock from the other one. So put it in the opposite, slide it in, and now you've got your nice little zip tie, and then just cut it off when you're done, trim to fit. All right, with the starter down there, now I set the intake manifold in and just have it kind of strapped with a bungee, kind kind of holding it up out of the way. So now it's time to get this thing in a little bit further. So you can see our AC pump is still sitting up out of the way. Kind of put the oil cooler almost in place. I want to leave it loose so I can move other things around though. But my dowel pin, which is right there, is just about, I just got to do a little bit of wiggling and I should be able to pop that one in. So we'll get a couple of bolts started and just kind of start working it in. All right, you can see right here, it closed the gap. Got it right on the dowel pins, and once I got a couple of the bolts started, I was just able to wiggle the motor a little bit while it was still hanging on the cherry picker, and it just popped right together. So that went great. Cherry picker's out of the way. With all the bolts started on the front, now we got to get up there and slide the starter into position and get the bolt started in it. As you can see, it is going to be a little bit tight, but still so far, I think doable. So to get the lower starter bolt, I just took the socket, taped the bolt on so that I could get it in there. Once I kind of got it pushed in, I turned it one, made sure it was threaded. Then I was able to put the extension in my little cordless ratchet, and I was able to put the lower starter bolt in. Now I should be able to get up here to the upper one. Yep, you can see it right down, way down there. Anyway, we'll get that one next. So right underneath that coolant line right there, that was probably the toughest bolt to get to. I probably should have left the thermostat housing off and left that line that runs over to the water pump. Had I left those off, that would have been much easier to do, but I was able to finally get it. All right, I tried to get some of the routing of the wires back kind of the way that it was. So you can see there, everything is plugged in, everything's kind of tucked back out of the way and all hooked back into some of the original loom. I did not install, so the coil packs, that part of the wiring harness is done. The back half I'm leaving off until I get that rear intake manifold on. So that's gonna be the next thing. One other little hint, don't put these in until you're actually ready to mount the manifold. With trying to get in there, I kept bumping them, they kept falling out. So I finally just pulled them, put them all up there so they're out of the way. So leave those out till you're ready for this step, which is putting that intake manifold back on. All right, to get down in there, I am pretty much just sitting right in the engine compartment, right on top of the engine. But you can see all the gaskets are in place. You can see those little green dots. That's that way you know it's on. I've got the two outside nuts each started. So everything on the back went on pretty good. Lots of little scrapes on your arms. Got to get in there pretty tight. But one thing don't forget to do, I did, is that metal bracket for the manifold. It goes on the head and on one of the thermostat bolts. That thermostat bolt, and then right there to the head, and then it mounts to the manifold, intake manifold right there. So I forgot to put that back on, and so now I had to take that back off, and now I'm gonna fight it a little bit. My mistake. So the only way I could figure out to get this bracket back on is to take the intake manifold back off, which I'm too far to do that now. So instead, I put a little notch in it, so I should be able to slide it down over the bolt. We'll see how it works. Okay, you can see with that little modification made, it slipped right back on the way it's supposed to. Everything's lining up nice. One other thing that's a good practice to do is to just run a tap into all your bolt holes. These, because this sat without the catalytic converter on it for a while, has a little bit of corrosion, which made the bolts kind of hard to start. So this is a M10 1.25 pitch thread. So just did the nuts, and now you can see they spin nice and freely. Now I'll do the bolts. All right, we are completely back together. I've got all the fluids filled. One thing to remember when putting this shield back on, don't plug that O2 sensor in until you put that back on, or else you have to get down in there and unplug it and move it again. So all just little tips. And one more thing, and that is pick up a manual. If you're gonna do this, it walks you through it. Sometimes you gotta go back and forth between different procedures to figure it out. But it will give you torque specs, it gives you locations, it has some pretty decent diagrams. This one's okay. You know, choose your own. I'm not endorsing this one. This just happens to be the one we got, but it will help you in this entire process. Let's give it a first start. So the last thing before we do that, we'll just tighten up our battery. Well, it sounds like our battery is a little bit low, so I'm gonna go ahead and put a charger on. Well, sorry I didn't hit record, but there it is. It's running. We're gonna check for leaks and see how it does. So we definitely got a little bit of smoke. Hopefully it was from some of the coolant that went down into the catalytic converter. We'll see if that clears up. All right, we got the engine up to temp. The exhaust finally cleared off, had a little bit of smoke. All the levels are good and it's running nice. The Cherokee has been running on its new junkyard engine now for a couple of weeks. It's probably got a couple thousand miles on it. The owner drives it about 100 miles every day for her commute. So it's running good. Whether or not I would do it again, putting an engine in from the top, well, I guess it would all depend on your circumstances. If you had a lift, yeah, it would be fairly easy to put it on a lift, raise it up, pull the engine out and do it that way. Without a lift though, this is definitely an option. Probably takes a little bit longer, but in the end, it all worked out and the car's running good. Been checking for leaks. Got one little leak, looks like on the radiator, so we may have to replace the radiator, and that may have caused that early head gasket failure to begin with. Thanks for watching, guys. Check back again. Maybe we'll do another junkyard motor.